staying warm inside your homes today. Going to pick up where we left off. We had just finished talking about Dred Scott and the bitterness that it was causing between the North and the South. And this bitterness what was caused by the Dred Scott decision was also deepened by some hard times on the horizon with the financial crash of 1857. And this happens late in 1857, and it was a panic during James Buchanan's administration. And some causes of this crash were the inpouring of California gold did its part to inflate the American currency. The demands of the Crimean War, which was a war, and is really like another world war. It was Russia versus the Ottoman Empire, the British, a kingdom called Sardinia, and France, and they were fighting over the Holy Land and Turkey. But because the grain was in such a high demand, it was overproduced by American farmers. And then also you had a frenzied speculation in land and railroads, which further ripped our economic fabric apart. So when the collapse came, over about 5,000 businesses failed within a year. It's noted by unemployment, accompanied by hunger. All of these things were widespread. So the North was actually hardest hit by the financial crash of 1857, while the South was enjoying pretty favorable cotton prices around the world. They kind of rode out the financial crash without much problem at all. But the panic conditions seemed further proof that cotton was king, and it kind of gave the South a false sense of economic security and made them overconfident, and brought the North and South even closer to the Civil War, because the South felt like they could not be stopped, that they were recession proof. So the financial crash during James Buchanan, he wasn't the most adept leader of this time, and had great difficulty bringing America out of this financial crash. So some new leadership was on the horizon by 1858, and there was a senatorial election that was taking place in Illinois in 1858, and it was claiming national spotlight as it pitted Abraham Lincoln on the left against the incumbent, or the guy who's already senator, Stephen A. Douglas. Now, Stephen A. Douglas's term was about to expire, and the Republicans decided that they were going to run against him, and they were going to choose a lawyer from Springfield, and his name's Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln, about 6 feet 4 inches tall, 180 pounds, very awkward but imposing figure. His legs and arms were abnormally long, and his head was covered in coarse, black, unruly hair. His face was sad, sunken, weather-beaten. But Lincoln was no elite, silver spoon child of well-to-do family. He was born in 1809 in Kentucky in a log cabin to impoverished parents, where he attended a frontier school for less than a year. But he was an avid reader. He was self-educated, and you could even hear in his accent, as he probably spoke more like we do than a Washington politician, saying things like "get" and "thar" and "I heard this." So, but he was narrow-chested, somewhat stoop-shouldered, and but he was physically fit. He was a wrestler and a great teller of stories, very amusing. But he was also prone to periods of depression, as melancholy kind of plagued Lincoln throughout his life. But neither really his private or professional lives were especially noteworthy. He married above his station, meaning he married socially upward into the Todd family of Kentucky, and his wife was kind of known as the she-wolf. She helped him, with patience and forbearance, as she was not the most pleasant person to be around. Um, but Lincoln was just kind of a simple guy. He carried important papers in his hat. Uh, so his rise as a political figure was not exactly rocket like. Um, as you know, he was a congressman in the Whig Party for several years, especially during the Mexican American War. You remember we talked about Spotty Lincoln, but he's pitted off against the fiery, loud, barrel chested little giant Stephen A. Douglas, who's nationally known, and they challenge each other into a series of joint debates, and this was a pretty rash decision because the stumpy senator from Illinois, Douglas, was probably the nation's best debater. But he accepted Lincoln's challenge, and they met 7 times throughout the state of Illinois from August to October of 1858. And at first glance, they're very ill-matched. Well-groomed, polished Douglas versus the lanky Lincoln with his screechy, high-pitched voice. But they had very different styles. Douglas he relies on table thumping and pointing and emotional reaction, whereas Lincoln relies more on logic than table thumping. The most famous of the 7 debates takes place in Freeport, Illinois, and this is where Lincoln nearly impaled his opponent on the horns of a dilemma. He asked him, if the people should vote slavery down, because remember Stephen A. Douglas is a big popular sovereignty guy. Who would prevail, the court or the people? Because this is after the Dred Scott decision, where the Dred Scott decision says slavery cannot be, restricted, and he says that if the people of a territory vote slavery down, how do you justify this? And Douglas countered with what is now known as the Freeport Doctrine. The Freeport Doctrine. Okay? And basically in the Freeport Doctrine, he says no matter how the Supreme Court ruled, slavery would stay down if the people voted it down, and laws to protect slavery would have to be passed in order to have slavery. So these would not be, black bondage would not soon disappear, but Douglas had American history on his side, and where public opinion does not support the federal government, as in the case of Jefferson's embargo, the law is almost impossible to enforce. So Douglas, ultimately, he's able to defeat Lincoln. All right, so in his Freeport Doctrine goes, pretty convoluted way around the question. Abraham Lincoln is straightforward and relies on logic. He says, we have the Supreme Court decision in Dred Scott saying that we can't restrict slavery. So how are you going to justify it if a territory votes it? And Douglas basically says we're going to do it by local government wise. If an area of a territory wants it, leaving it to the local government as opposed to the federal government. So ultimately, Douglas defeats Lincoln for the Senate seat, and the Little Giant's loyalty to popular sovereignty still had great powerful appeal in Illinois, and that was probably the decisive factor. And Lincoln, although he was defeated, he is now in the national spotlight in company with the most prominent Northern politicians, and this makes him a likely potential Republican nominee for president 2 years later in 1860. So that's really what comes out of the Lincoln-Douglas debate. Nothing that necessarily, the Freeport Doctrine comes out of it, but also the fact that Abraham Lincoln becomes a nationally known figure in American political life. Okay? So I think that's a good place to stop for today. As I talked pretty fast, and you guys will probably be pausing to write stuff down. So I know it's not the longest bit of notes for today, but I'm sure you're going to have a lot of stuff to do with your other classes, with your meetings and such. So, but if you have questions about anything, or if you need to research whatever, do whatever you got to do. Outlines will still be due on February the 8th, so that's less than a week, I guess a week away, around a week away. If you have questions, don't hesitate to contact me, and I'll be seeing you.